What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a look at Solium Infernum, a grand strategy title set in the depths of hell, so a sort of darker twist on a civilization title, if you will. But before we dive into that, I do need to mention here at the beginning of the video that this is in fact sponsored by the game's developer, League of Geeks, which is also the publisher behind the title. But I accepted this sponsorship because I had had people ask me about this game previously, and I enjoyed the concept and the aesthetic, and if you happen to enjoy what you see here and you'd like to learn more about the title, there will be a link in the description below where you can do just that. So with that said, let's dive into it, talk about what you can expect, things to know, and everything else. Now, this is a turn-based strategy title that sees us taking on the role of one of 8 Archfiends after the Throne of Pandemonium in Hell. The ruler of Hell, their dark majesty, if you will, has gone absent, simply disappeared, and in the wake of that absence, the Archfiends would like a crack at the title, and thus the throne, and are battling it out to see who wins exactly that. Taking on the role of one of these Archfiends, you can, either in single-player chronicles, single-player matches against AI, or multiple types of online multiplayer, betray and backstab your way up the ladder to ultimately take the throne for yourself, or simply be lost to the political machinations of hell. First up, let's talk about the gameplay modes, starting with the tutorial itself. If you're not familiar with these kinds of games at all, don't worry. There is a pretty robust tutorial that will walk you through your first game, explaining what all the mechanics are, how individual things work, and I personally found it very helpful, and it should get you up to speed with the individual mechanics if this video doesn't lay them out well enough for you even. Then there are the single player matches against AI, pretty straightforward. You and up to 3 to 5 AI players will battle it out. But then we have the Chronicles. The Chronicles in particular are interesting to me because rather than just being single player matches, they are single player games with a bit of a story. You take on one of these for each of the Archfiends, and it sort of shows off their rise to power and how they came across their station to begin with. It also features a few extra objectives outside the normal one of simply trying to win by any means necessary. But another way this game offers interesting matches is through its multiplayer. Both regular online multiplayer in a live session, and then a very unique feature via their asynchronous multiplayer. Now, the traditional stuff works pretty much as you would expect. You can either create a game or join one through a lobby. It's also possible to create a game code that then can be shared with other players to join them with you specifically, or you can even simply open up your game to the public and play with a mix of friends and online players in matches of 4 to 6 people. The part of this I find really interesting is actually the asynchronous multiplayer, because this allows you to play a game intermittently when you're not even online at the same time. You'll have your normal options such as the size of the map, the number of capturable locations, known as places of power, the number of players, the number of turns, again, the usual stuff. But what makes this interesting is that once the game is made, turns are taken without the pressure of a time limit, because you can simply take your turn for the day, log off, at which point all other players in the match have the rest of that time limit to take their turns, and then once everyone has taken their turn again within that time limit, the game will progress and the timer will reset, though of course if the timer goes past that time it just continues on to the next set of turns anyway. With this method, you can effectively play a game of multiplayer when you have time over the course of days or weeks even, which I think goes a long way to combating the need to, of course, accommodate schedules and the usual things that get in the way of multiplayer gaming. But now let's talk a little more specifically about the individual mechanics at play and how a match might twist and turn or work out according to your own preferences, starting with, of course, how do you win? There are 4 primary win conditions to a game of Solium Infernum, one of which is the assembly of the Conclave. You see, in the absence of their dark majesty, an election is effectively being held among the Archfiends to appoint a new ruler. It's possible for you to win this election by simply gaining prestige. You gain prestige by betraying and backstabbing your friends, controlling places of power, destroying other characters' units, things you would basically expect. If the game actually reaches its turn limit, the assembly of the Conclave is called, and the person with the most prestige over the course of a few turns will be declared the winner. Your second option is using relics. There are relics that can manipulate the assembly, helping you take a more meddlesome role in the actual vote itself. The third option is simply killing all of the other Archfiends, which can be done by basically bullying them until you can declare a blood feud, at which point you can take out their stronghold. Now you can't do this right away, but over the course of the game you can make several demands, win several skirmishes known as vendettas, and after that's been done a few times you can declare a blood feud, at which point you can attack their stronghold directly, which will eliminate them. And if you do this to every other player, obviously you win because there's no one left. But then there is the last major way, and this is also a method of force, but a little more direct. You see, the throne of hell is contained in the city of Pandemonium, and you can simply take the city by force. And this is difficult to do because it's a very well fortified city, but if you take the time to build up your troops, it is possible to do. From there, let's talk about the Archfiends you'll be playing along the way. You will have your choice of 8 of these characters. Each one of them is unique and has its own play style, at least out of the gate. So every Archfiend has 5 stats. They each start with a few points in each one, which determines what is initially available to them in terms of rituals, diplomacy, etc. They typically also come with a passive effect or a unique ability that they get, such as Astaroth's Draconic Razzia, which allows them to declare open hostilities with a target for a single turn, as opposed to the usual method I described earlier. You could also play as Lilith, Andromalius, Mammon, Murmur, Belial, Erzabet, or lastly Beelzebub. Now, of these, I would say Belial was my personal favorite because he leans into what he is known for and what I think suits the game very well, which is lies and manipulation. So he starts with powers that actually grant him prestige by causing turmoil amongst the other players, that is to say they are actively engaged with diplomacy, which involves insults and demands from others, and you simply passively benefit from those things. You can also use your diplomacy to instead directly engage with a character, rather pit 2 other Archfiends against each other, which is very in form for Belial. He also gets an extra order right away at the start of the match, as opposed to having to work up to that, so he gets to do more per turn as well, so I found his character, for instance, to be a lot of fun to mess around with. Point being, of course, that each of these Archfiends has a different play style, and it's, of course, best if you lean into that. So what exactly does that involve? Well, every time it's your turn, you're going to have a variety of options available to you, such as moving your units or your legions. Each of them has stats associated with them, one of which is how many hexes they can move per turn. Moving your legions onto unclaimed ground makes that new ground your territory. Other Archfiends cannot enter your territory unless they are actively engaged in a vendetta or blood feud with you, and you can use this to, say, block off the movement routes of other Archfiends and ensure you have access to the resources you need by taking advantage of when and where other Archfiends can move. Commanding your units, using the bazaar or the shop to order up new legions or praetors, artifacts, manuscripts, etc. all also consists of an order, and each turn of yours you can issue so many orders based on your own stats. You start with 2 of these being available, but can unlock more by ranking up your powers at the most basic level. But in order to purchase more legions or anything from the bazaar, often cast rituals, commit schemes, etc., you're going to need tribute, which is your resource. Those 4 resources you see in the top left corner consists of your token coins. You spend these coins on all of the individual things you might need. You'll gain a little bit of this passively as you do things, but the main method is by seeking tribute. You see, one of the orders you can give is to demand your servants go around and seek tribute from the people in your lands, which will give you access to a choice of individual tribute coins, which is going to, of course, enable you to do other things, such as pump up your forces. A prominent example of this is simply hiring the services of a praetor or a champion who can then be attached to an individual legion to buff up their stats, which is especially important when it comes to combat. When your forces meet directly with another character's forces or simply a place of power that is well defended by its normal denizens, you'll have to fight for control of those things or just simply to defeat the enemy. Combat is handled in 3 phases, which is the 3 numbers you can see on the left side of the screen there, and they resolve in order: ranged, melee, and infernal. In each phase of combat, those 2 competing numbers for each legion are checked. The higher one wins, of course, and the difference in those numbers is dealt as damage to the other unit's HP. Some units have special abilities, can move farther, or can be equipped with more praetors, relics, manuscripts, etc. So there's a little more to it, but that's the general gist of it. And then the other type of units are the actual locations. Each character starts with a stronghold as well as an individual legion. Another aspect that is unique to every Archfiend and a reason to pick one over the other, for instance. But moving and commanding units is far from all you'll be doing, as this is a game about political machinations in hell, so we have things like schemes and diplomacy, and not to mention secret rituals. So schemes are side goals your Archfiend can think up that then can be declared either publicly or privately, and completion of these goals will earn you prestige and potentially undermine the other opponents. Now, declaring these publicly will get you more prestige right away, but opens up the possibility for them to be undermined by opposing players, whereas private schemes allow you to, of course, pursue those goals without being hindered, but earn you less prestige overall. Though since you don't know about them, it's very possible for other Archfiends to complete these under your nose, since the total isn't added until the end of the game, if they were private, of course. But those are far from the only machinations you can get up to, because then we have our diplomacy. A chief tactic of all of the Archfiends is to engage with the other Archfiends in multiple ways, such as demanding tribute, insulting them, making use of extra actions, or even perhaps sending them an envoy to propose a deal of sorts, though typically truces in a world like this are tenuous at best, as there can be only one winner in the end. Now, upon sending some of these requests, demands, hostilities, if you will, the other character has a chance to accept or reject them. Oftentimes, accepting something negative comes with consequences, such as a loss of prestige, to say the very least, but if the opposing action is instead rejected, it can lead to a vendetta. A vendetta allows open hostilities between you and that character based on a set term, such as you destroying a set amount of their legions, taking over certain control points, and if you do this enough, that is to say win these vendettas, you can eventually declare a blood feud and just wipe them off the map completely. Now, this is where a bit of the strategy comes in, because obviously if you want to do that, you want to be set up to actually win, which involves having troops in the right place to back up perhaps your baseless threats. Another aspect of the game, though, is powers and rituals. You see, as you gain tribute and thus your currency goes up, you can spend some of that on increasing your individual powers, which is those stats I talked about earlier. You can rank them up, which will give you access to new rituals to cast, new passive abilities, extra orders to be given per turn, and in some cases, this translates to direct increases to your legion's abilities even. So you can spend this tribute you're earning just to simply make you more powerful. But if you'd like to take a more direct approach with your character, you can also try out the ritual system. Every character, based primarily on your powers, is capable of casting rituals. These can be resisted by other characters in certain instances, but rituals allow you to do things like either deal direct damage to something, force the loss of tribute to someone else, reveal what they happen to have going on, such as their powers and abilities, just to name a few options. So, in addition to everything else, your main character can take a more direct approach with some of these rituals. Belial was actually really good at one of my favorites, which allowed me to, again, gain prestige simply based on the diplomacy actions of other characters, which I really enjoyed. Now, most of what I just mentioned comes at the cost of either tribute or wagering prestige, because if you lose prestige, you of course lose your chances of winning the throne. But another way to keep people from just wildly accumulating prestige is a bit of a prestige sink that offers benefits in exchange, which is increasing your rank in hell. Everyone starts out as a baron, but if you spend prestige, you can then rank up to a marquis, a duke, or a prince. Each of these options unlocks more powerful diplomatic actions, on top of giving you extra voting power in the occasional vote that comes up for an effect that might take place. You can decide in a sort of this or situation and pick the thing that benefits you the most. Because as turns pass in game, the assembly of the conclave will have the players vote on individual laws, that kind of thing. And speaking of that, it's also important to remember who happens to be regent on any given turn. The title of Regent changes hands as the game passes every turn, but the Regent gets to go first and can also enact a specific ability that they draw when they become the Regent, which will usually have ongoing effects such as covering the area in a storm that can hinder movement, force a loss of tribute, for instance, etc., though you usually have to pay tribute to activate these. And while that is far from everything there is to know about Solium Infernum, I think that paints a pretty good picture of what you can expect from the title, what it's all about, but everything I just mentioned might actually sound a little bit familiar to you because this is a remake of a 2009 game of the same name, both of which were inspired by the poem Paradise Lost, the epic poem by 17th century poet John Milton to be specific. Overall though, I think Solium Infernum brings a pretty unique experience to the table that is worth checking out, and if you'd like to learn more about it, there is once again a link in the description below for you. But regardless of any of that, truly just thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.